You find yourself in a dark, dimly lit room. Surrounding you are 4, maybe 5 or 6 players. Their eyes look upon you expectantly, waiting to see what your next move will be. What do? We'll talk about that.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Middle-Aged Barbarians. I'm Eddie.
And I'm Eugene.
And well, today we'll talk about basically running the first adventure. What will you do? What to expect? The stuff that should be in each session.
So in the previous video, we spoke a little bit about session 0, character creation, getting their backstories. And now that you know who's sitting at your table, what they're looking for, you got to get them out the door. You got to give them that initial kick to get their adventure going.
You can do it in many ways. Perhaps on session 0, you already decided something. Perhaps their previous relationships that were formed in this creation make sense for them to start already doing stuff. Or something as silly as a job posting at a tavern, or an NPC that they know gives them orders or sets up bait, like, oh, maybe if you do this, I'll give you this reward, things like that.
I mean, you could even work it out with your own players. You could give one of them the job of reuniting a group of adventurers to do, I don't know, maybe protect a local town from incursioning enemies, or maybe the prince needs somebody to deal with, I don't know, rats in the king's cellar.
Yeah.
And his guards are too busy to do it.
And things like that will eventually end in the players fighting demons in hell itself. So, well, that doesn't make sense. It actually would be devils in hell themselves. Well, I mean, it depends on your campaign.
Technicalities.
So, what happens next? Well, you have a quest, but the players are actually kind of clueless. And this isn't like video games that they give you tutorials. They have to find out stuff for themselves.
When we're talking about a session, usually a session will take anywhere between maybe 3 or 4 hours on average. If you're lucky, maybe you have 5 or 6 hours. Maybe you have a little bit less. So we have to get all this information and all these things done in a limited amount of time.
Yeah, and remember, this is not just like a job. This is actually a social activity. So you will be messing around, speaking gossip, having snacks. I mean, it obviously is part of it.
Right.
So, well, yeah, like Eugene said, you first acquire the quest, then
That's the first part.
You have like a general idea of what you have to do. So, for instance, let's speak about the rats in the king's cellar.
Wow.
You have to go to your players should usually go and ask around. Oh, where's the king's cellar? Oh, it's this way.
So it's a period of investigation where the characters would have to either talk to local NPCs, maybe get some clues, or, just figure out what exactly they're fighting. Maybe it's not regular rats. Maybe they're dire rats.
Or something. Wow. Rats that come from hell and have, like, pointy teeth or something like that. Yeah.
Vorpal rats,
yeah. Really evil rats. Or maybe it's just one rat, but it's, like, big.
It's a really nasty-looking rat. So they have to investigate. They have to get ready and get prepared before they actually go out and do the quest.
Perhaps this is an unusual rat that can only be damaged by throwing stones at it. Remember, as a DM, you can modify anything.
Yeah. So then next up, after they investigate, they would more than likely have to travel to a certain area. In this case, if they're with the king, then they have to travel down to the cellar. But in a more elaborate setting, they maybe would have to go to a nearby town or a neighboring kingdom or a temple that's lost in the woods or the forest or some savage jungles. No? So then they have to travel to where they're going to go.
This is a great time. Travel is a great spot for more storytelling-oriented players to have a feel, especially of the story. You can describe where they're going, the sights they see, that sort of thing, and it gives a lot of ambience to the game. And it's also a time for themselves to interact with each other, which is something that it's important. They
have to set up watch at night at the campsite, and you can pair them up in twos, and then they'll have to interact with each other to keep awake. Yeah. Also keep random encounters. I love random encounters. When traveling, random encounters are key.
Yeah, for instance, they see a stranger walking on the other side of the road. What would they do?
Is he an evil stranger? Is he a friendly stranger? Is he a guy minding his own business, or is he about to get attacked by 4 or 5 crazy warmonger player characters?
And sometimes the funniest thing would be that they choose not to avoid the encounter, so they do like really dumb things to avoid it, but it's part of the fun, and it's great.
But where are they traveling to, one would ask? Well, the logical answer would be they'll be traveling to the dungeon. It is Dungeons and Dragons after all.
After all, yeah.
But dungeons isn't necessarily, a stony, dark place with chains and bars and stuff. A dungeon can be just the setting for these encounters. It could be a forest temple. It could be a vast city, a small town.
It could be the prom ball, the ballroom of the king. I mean, it could be any place. It's just the dungeon's like a particular space that is defined, it's confined, and you know how it will work on this encounter that you plan to have. But with whom will we have this encounter?
Yeah, we need a villain. We need typically it's referred to as the BBEG, the big bad evil guy. But if we're starting off, you may not want to have him face off against, the late game nemesis. So you're going to have some small fries for them to deal with. Maybe he's just a local thug. Maybe it's the Vorpal rat in the King's Cellar. It's your choice.
It's your choice, and it's something to look for. That's very important for them to have that. It's someone to look for and to fight with, so they can solve the conflict. It can even be something more philosophical, like the nature of distress. I'm messing with you. It's not that sort of game usually, but the big bad guy is not necessarily bad. Remember, it could be an antagonist. It could be also a circumstance, and sometimes even you can solve the conflict even without combat. I mean, that's the sort of stuff that more storytelling-oriented players love to just to just talk and solve the thing. I mean, the bad guys are not necessarily.
I'm going to revoke your barbarian card.
Why? I mean, barbarians can have feelings as well.
It's a very modern barbarian take.
I guess.
Appreciate it.
I mean, being barbarian just means that you're not part of the mainstream, I guess, in a way. In a way, being radical is a true sign of barbarism.
Okay. Anyway, so you have your big bad evil guy. And then the last part of the adventure would be the closing of the adventure, which is basically just like a time for your players to get their reward, maybe close up that little brief story that they were in, or the part of the story that they're in when you go more along the line, get their rewards, give them time to go shopping. Shopping is usually fun. You can do that during the game or maybe even outside of the game if people aren't too into that. And if they level up, which would be a great time to level up, you can have them get their new powers, throw their stats.
Talk about that stuff, that new stuff. Talk about it with them. Like, oh, you're going to be able to do this or this or this.
I mean, I don't know about you, but like on average, how many like conflicts or fights or encounters or skill checks would you try to get into one session?
I mean, depends on the players, because I have players that we only manage to get one.
Well, it also depends on the amount of players. I mean, if you're an average size of maybe like 4 or 5 players, I think combat on average will take you maybe close to an hour per combat.
About, yeah.
And I've been in groups where there's 7, 8 players. So a simple fight between everybody and throwing initiative and taking turns, it lasts for at least an hour and a half, 2 hours. So that's something you need to take into consideration when you're programming your session, to know, well, I have so many players, they're into this, so I'm going to throw this kind of skill check and these fights and this random encounter. So maybe like what, 3, maybe 4?
4, that would be about it. And like Gene said, remember the big bad guy, the big climax, the dungeon at the end is not necessarily the dungeon of the campaign. It's just a step that you try to fit into your session. And if time runs out,
you can leave a cliffhanger. Cliffhangers are good.
Cliffhangers are good. You can take it back. Remember, like we said, take notes, keep a journal so you know where you were left standing. Yeah. Your players should also take notes, but they don't always, so.
Also, if you're using grids and miniatures, something that we use a lot, if we're in the middle of a battle and it's already 1 o'clock in the morning and we gotta go, you just snap a picture. Take a picture of where everybody is on the grid, and then when you get up to the next session, you can just put stuff out the way it was and keep going from that same part of the fight.
Yeah.
All right. Well, okay. The next thing we want to talk about in today's episode, it might be a little hard to talk about, a little sensitive. but it's something that's probably going to eventually happen. We talked about the parts of the adventure. We talked about the dungeon, the encounters, the fights, the big bad guy at the end of the story or at the end of the arc. But what happens if your players make a bad choice?
Yeah, conflicts have stakes. They need to have stakes to be fun.
If there's no risk, is the reward even really a reward?
Of course. And, well, the player characters, not the players, that's something of the satanic panic of the 80s. The player characters are risking their lives in these actions. So what happens when they lose? Because they lose, especially at early levels. No, well, in any level, but especially at early levels, they could lose. What happens then?
Yeah, usually a level 1 character has very low hit points, and if you put them in a situation where they make a bad choice, or they don't see the trap, or they fail a check, it could have pretty bad consequences. How many times have you killed your players?
Oh, well, a lot. I mean, a lot of times, yeah, I don't know, for every campaign that I've done, like at least 1 or 2 players die. Player characters. So what happens when they die? Well, they die. There's several things that could happen. If they're high level enough, if they're attached to the character, they can choose to try to revive them. Remember, we're in a magical setting, so death is not the end.
And it'll give you an opportunity to do a little bit extra in the storytelling and involve a quest to revive the dead teammate.
Yeah. Or if they're not attached, just make a new character. I mean, and it can even be a clone of the previous character, basically a clone. In a campaign I really liked, one of the characters that I really grew attached to, he was a scientific monk, which was something very, very interesting. A martial artist, but he fought like this rather than like that. And the first iteration of the character died in a total party kill, which is something we'll talk a little bit on now. And then basically the whole table chose to, well, we'll make new characters. And I made like a new version of this same character.
Well, I mean, in a movie that we both enjoyed quite a bit called The Gamers, there's a great part where they're trying to get the wizard across the river, but the wizard is hydrophobic, so he can't cross. And one of the players tries to knock him out so they can take him across unconscious, and accidentally kills his teammate. Mm-hmm. And I think they cut to the next scene where the party's traveling without the wizard, and they run into a mysterious wizard in the middle of the forest. And he says, "Hey, your party looks like you need a wizard. Yes, you look quite trustworthy yourself." And they just kind of, force the integration of the wizard into the team.
The lost twin brother, he was sent by the organization. A lot of things can be done.
But you mentioned total party kill.
Total party kill, that's more dramatic. Perhaps the instigator or the player that likes to start things up, rather than talking to the big bad guy, they chose to throw an axe at them, and the big guy is going to answer. It's going to answer with overwhelming force. And
maybe something you thought would just be like a narrative exchange between the players and this obviously overpowered villain turns into a massacre.
Yeah, so what happens then?
Do you let the players live?
Usually no. Depends. The instigator obviously has to die. I mean, the guy that made the decision that let everybody else die, he has to go. He has to. I mean, his character is gone. I mean, it would be it's a nice lesson for him. But the rest of the characters that don't have fault of their own, well, you can do several things. You can do a little bit of Deus Ex Machina. I mean, it's not generally considered good narrative, but remember, this is not narrative. This is a game, so you can do that. You can say that, I don't know, a force of good saved you at the last minute. An angel came and grabbed you from the clutches of the evil dragon, and you're safe now.
Maybe.
Or what else would you do to save them?
I wouldn't.
You wouldn't do it.
No, I think players need to have the knowledge that if I mess up, I can mess up.
And you mess up the whole group.
And if you're going to coddle them, well, maybe not the whole group, but like you said, at least the instigator's got to go.
Yeah. And that doesn't mean he's expelled from the game. I mean, if you, like I said, it's collaborative. If everybody agrees, he can make a new character, join again, or perhaps if it's necessary because he doesn't mesh with the group, well, he actually goes from the table when his character is gone. So yeah, remember, there are stakes. You have to keep them present, and your players have to feel them as well. Just to recap, there are a few steps that are recommended to have in your whole session to cover in advancing the adventure. You first try to acquire the quests. You investigate what you need to do to solve the quest. You travel there to the location. You get into a dungeon, which is the scenario where the conflict will occur. You fight the main source of conflict, either for the whole campaign or for this step of the campaign. And then you have a little closing time. You solve a denouement, if you wish, epilogue, if you wish, of this moment. And even if you don't manage to fit all in the whole session, it's a good benchmark to have to try to cover all of these steps in that. But remember, players are fickle beings, and you could always, for instance, maybe the whole session will be investigation, and you just leave everything at cliffhanger. That's cool as well. Keep cliffhangers. Cliffhangers is nice. They're good, right? Not the movie with Stallone. That one's not that good. I don't recommend that one.
Okay. Well, that about wraps up today's episode. The next episode, we'll be talking about player expectations, trying to keep them in character, which is kind of tricky. But before we go, we'd really like to hear from you guys. How would you deal with player death in TPKs?
Are you merciful like myself, or Iron Fisted like Eugene and the producer? So remember to rate responsibly.
Rate responsibly. Leave a like, subscribe, comments down below, and we will be looking for your comments and questions. Hopefully, in a future episode, we'll even read some of them and make a deal about it. Anyway.
Yeah. Anyway.
Right. We'll see you next episode. We love you. Roll the dice!